The presentation is titled Simple Ways to Make Webhook Security Better. Give it up for him.
Thanks, y'all, and thanks for coming to my talk. I know I'm the last thing standing between you and the closing ceremony, so hopefully this will be a good use of time, and you'll learn some things today. As mentioned, I'm Scott McAllister. I'm a developer advocate at a company called ngrok. Who's heard of ngrok? Okay, some of you. You know who we are. Some of you might not. I'll talk a little bit about ngrok today, but mainly we're talking about webhooks. And so you're here today to learn a little bit about webhooks. You probably have an idea of what webhooks are. I'm going to really briefly go over that, but then we'll dig into actually the different security measures you can take to verify and to validate your webhooks, making sure that you have the messages coming from the sources that you're expecting them to come from, and that the messages obviously stay consistent as they come from the source. The majority of my data today and the majority of my information comes from a site called Webhooks FYI. It's essentially a collection of research that we've done where we've polled over 100 different webhook providers and as many webhook providers as we know of, and then gathered that information to see how webhooks are done, security-wise, implementation-wise, trying to set a standard for webhooks in the industry. And it's a collaborative effort, so if you go to that site and you see that there are webhook providers that you use or that you actually provide to the community and it's not there, we'd love to have that there. So either let me know or create a pull request on that project, and we'd be happy to include it into the project so that we can help the industry and honestly set a standard for how we can do webhooks securely. Because as you'll see from our research, there is varying levels of security that's available, even from the different providers. So I have a few requests. I go around, I speak at conferences, and I speak at a lot of conferences, and there's a few things that you would think that like we come up here, we stand up here, and I've been in that crowd many, many times as well. You're quietly on your phone, quietly on your computer, and you think, yeah, it's not going to bother the speaker, but we totally notice. However, today I actually need you to be on your phones. So at some point, there's going to be a point where I'm going to ask you, not now necessarily, to pull out your phone to help me generate some webhooks. Also, if you have laptops, like a gentleman over here, could also use some help generating some webhooks using your laptop, either using some software for creating HTTP requests like Postman or Insomnia. You'll even get some bonus points if you use curl. Here at this conference, I'm guessing there'll be several of those. If you want to let me know afterwards, I can give you a special prize. So curl users, definitely let me know if you're using curl. And then finally, if you're on the socials and you like anything you hear, anything that's interesting, and you feel like tweeting about it, if you could also tag ngrok HQ. That's my employer. Kind of lets them know that, hey, Scott came to Phoenix or Mesa, Arizona, and he actually did a little bit of good. So if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. So webhooks, I'm feeling, by the way, just going off script for a second, I normally love to wander. Like my body wants to walk over here and talk to you and here and talk to you, but you're gonna see me like jerk back and forth because the microphone's right here. But we will all make it. We'll make it today. So webhooks, talking about what those are HTTP requests that we make. However, they're a little different. In a regular HTTP relationship, you, as a client, send a request to a server, and that server sends a response relatively immediately. You say, I need this, server says, here you go. In a webhook situation, it's more of the server saying, you know, I got a lot of updates, so how about you give me your address, don't call me, I'll call you. And it will send you those updates to an address that you provide. So when you sign up for a webhook, you say, I want you to send these messages to this particular endpoint, and when you do, I'll accept those and we'll go along our merry way. And so that message comes to the listener, and the listeners generally respond. Some providers actually require it. Some providers need to see a response come back, or they'll cut off your webhooks. That way, it's basically saying, trying to check for the health of the situation or of the relationship it has with you. For instance, today in our talk, we're going to be using Twilio webhooks. So I'm going to come out here, and I'm going to show not my text messages. That's actually part of my talk, though, so it's okay. So we're going to come to Twilio. And you know, using conference Wi-Fi is fantastic. It's great. So trust me, I signed up for some webhooks on Twilio. When I told them, I said, hey, when there's an event, such as a text message, this specific event, send a webhook to this address that I specify. And Twilio's like, sure, plan on it. I'll do it. Trust me, it works. So we're going to skip past that because it's, I mean, you see a web form, right? I mean, that's it. We've all seen a bunch of web forms. All right, so why webhooks? Why do we want to have that information now as far as updating our application based on something that's happening on another system? Well, why HTTP? Well, because everything on the web's running over HTTP, mainly, for the most part. And why it's going to be passing over either in JSON or XML. Sometimes still XML. There's some people still using XML, but most of the time it's JSON that you're going to be receiving those messages. And because you're receiving those messages in a format that mainly the whole industry uses, you don't have to worry about what's going on or how that tech stack is on the server or on the provider. You're tech stack agnostic, and you can handle bringing that information into your system, but updating your system based on the state changes of the provider system. You want to have an update. Say if you're connected to a version control system and there's pull requests or merge requests open, or the status is changed on those things. If you're using something like PagerDuty and there's an incident that happens and you want to get notified of that incident, or if the status changes on that incident and you want to have that in your software to update whatever is going on, that's the type of webhook that would happen there. They're also really super easy to spoof and compromise. No. They're super easy to test and to mock. We'll talk about how easy that is here in just a second. So before we get to that point, we're going to actually take this number that we got from Twilio, and I have an application here. And in my application, just a simple node app, it's receiving an HTTP request at this endpoint, which is basically anything at the endpoint there. And then it's going to return a response that says, thank you for your message. I'm going to fire that up. And so let's see, we're going to have our application here. It's going to be running on port 3000, which is great. So it's running on localhost, port 3000. But the problem is the webhook can't hit localhost. So for our webhooks to actually get to our code, we'd use a service like ngrok. Promise I'm not going to sell, but I'm going to show you a little bit about what ngrok can do. So ngrok is a utility that can provide essentially a reverse proxy to the fact that we have code running on our machine. Resolution okay in the back, by the way? Good? Okay, thanks. And our application, if you remember, it's running on port 3000 over HTTP. Not going to do that. I'm actually going to say, but we also told Twilio a specific address. A specific address for our domain, we have hooks.ngrokpaperscissors.com. I spelled that right the first time in front of people. That was great. So here we go. So now I have an application. It's at hooks.ngrokpaperscissors.com. And so my webhooks have a place to go. So now I need your help. Here we're going to go not to that site because that didn't load. We're going to come back here, and I need some folks to pull out your phones and to text this number. Now, as you do that, remember, these texts are going to show up on the screen. Be nice, please. I'll give you a second. Pop that there. We'll go see, okay, we got some requests coming in. Thank you. So we come over here. Now, if I want to actually look at those webhooks, I can come over here to my ngrok inspector, and I can say, all right, I see a hello, I see a ooga booga, I see something else I can't see here. How about yeah, there we go. My old man eyes up here on stage. Hi, Dad, awesome. That's my son. He's watching online. Hey, Andrew, what's up, buddy? And let's see. ngrok, nice. So we have these coming in. Welcome to Arizona. Thank you. It's my second time. Lovely state, by the way. I come from Seattle. It's very dark and rainy right now. You are not dark and rainy right now. It's lovely, lovely here. So yeah, here we have our requests coming in. It's nice, right? I can get these text messages. I get the text. I get the structure of our requests coming in. I can even look at the raw format, and I see some Twilio-y sort of headers, and then I have my body of my texts, or of the HTTP request coming in from Twilio with our text messages in it. All right, so coming back to our slides here. Now, with that really easy transaction that was happening, those text messages hit Twilio, right? Twilio, through the webhook at my code took it, received it, and output a message. Super easy, but is it secure? How do we know that those HTTP requests that were hitting our application were actually still coming from Twilio? There's a few inherent risks with webhooks. If you think about webhooks, and for me, for a long time, when I was using webhooks, it was literally like hook the thing up and hey, cool, it works, and I went on my merry way. I didn't really think about checking to see if they're actually coming in from the actual source or from the provider. So you have a few risks. First is interception. The fact that folks can get it, a third party could get in between and then start doing some nasty things. They can impersonate the fact that they're coming in from Twilio or GitHub or PagerDuty or whomever is sending out those webhooks. They can also impersonate the fact that they are coming from those various services and then manipulate the fact that they can manipulate those text messages that are coming in, those webhooks that are coming in, and change them. And then your application doesn't know, well, I didn't know that it was coming from Twilio and then got changed. And then also you have replay attacks. Think about a situation that you intercept something and then they can kind of maybe sit on it and then send it later. Say if like one of the webhooks was gonna cause an order to happen on your system, your store per se, and then it had that order happen again. It's like that's a bad thing. So replay attacks are another thing that you need to be worried about. So if we go back to our phone number, you can continue sending text messages, but now I need some help from folks with laptops. So if you have a laptop, I need you to pull that out and either use Postman or curl, Insomnia, something to make an HTTP request. And post to hooks.ngrokpaperscissors.com. For demonstration purposes, I'll jump out and I'll do that myself. So I'll come out here. And I'm actually going to, I pointed out that this is the format of the request coming in. So I want to make something that looks fairly similar to that. So I'm going to come out of here. And I've already made my HTTP request look fairly similar. I'm going to find the tag for my body right here. There we go. And on stage, CactusCon. All right. I'm going to take this here, posting it to hooks.ngrokpaperscissors.com. I post that. I get a nice 200. I even get the nice message of thank you for your message that the application on my machine is returning. And then if I come over here and look at that HTTP request, I see a who am I? Something coming in from someone else's machine. Something blank there, nice. And then right here, on stage at CactusCon. But if I look at the rest of this, that's looking fairly similar to the things that are good. So if we come back here and look at a good one, my eyes aren't seeing it, there we go. But we look at the good ones, the actual text messages, not those, but the ones that the actual text messages coming in from Twilio, it looks a lot like it. The Ooga Booga, the Hi Dad. So we have no idea. So we need to verify, we need to actually provide some security to that webhook through those messages that are coming into our application. So what I want to do is I'm going to step through some of the practices that we found that different providers are doing to verify that the provider and that the listener, the ones who are consuming the webhooks and the ones providing those webhooks, are who they say they are. The first one is something called one-time verification. Now, one-time verification is done when you set up that webhook. When you set up that webhook subscription and you want to create that relationship between a listener and a provider, the provider requires you to show that you have control over the endpoint where it wants to send the webhooks. A good example of this is a company called Smartsheet. And Smartsheet has essentially, think about them, anyone familiar with Smartsheet? Okay, we have a few people familiar with Smartsheet. Kind of like an online spreadsheet looking thing. So imagine in your head like an online spreadsheet or project management tool. And so when there's updates to that thing, there's going to be lots of different data in there. You don't know if that data is sensitive information or just lots of information. And so Smartsheet requires when you create a webhook to actually do it through their API rather than through their UI. That I was supposed to show you with Twilio, but Twilio didn't load. Thanks a lot, Twilio. And so with Smartsheet, you hit a post on the webhook's endpoint, and it gives you a response saying, great, I know you want to create a webhook. Here's the ID, but sorry, it's not verified, and it's not enabled. And so then you have to make a second API call. You send a put request back to the provider. So back to Smartsheet. You send it to the endpoint, but / the ID that you just received. And then you're sending a request to say, okay, now I want to verify this thing. And Smartsheet says, all right, that's nice. I know you want to update this and make it enabled and verify it, but I want to make sure that you have control over this endpoint that you gave me when you created the webhook. So this endpoint that you gave me, I'm going to send it a verification request that has a header in it that says Smartsheet Hook Challenge, and I need you to send that back to me as a Smartsheet Hook response. I need that same value back. And then if I can get that back from you, and then I'll take that, and my response will be sent back to your initial request saying, hey, okay, your application, your web hook is enabled, and now you're good to go. Because the interesting thing is when it hits out at that, when the subscriber, the callback URL, when that code is responding back to Smartsheet, it has to do it through an API call, which means it needs an authentication bearer token. It needs to have a token that's from your account. So Smartsheet can tie that response back to your account. So you have absolute control, or at least that endpoint also has control of your auth tokens. So there's that too. But usually you have control. It's a verification that you have control of that endpoint, of the callback URL. And so now Smartsheet can have that assurance that you're in control of all the different pieces that are operating inside of the webhook. One-time verification is also a little bit of a misnomer because in Smartsheet's case, they actually go through the same verification again, about every 500 or so, I think, webhooks. So about the 500th webhook or so, it basically sends a response saying, hey, by the way, these aren't verified, so I need you to go through this whole process again. And so your code then needs to have a check. It needs to be checking for that API response to say that these things aren't verified so that it can kick off the process again to do this whole verification process. So something to keep in mind when you're dealing with a one-time verification. So with one-time verification, it validates that the consumer controls your destination. It can also easily be combined with other forms of security and authentication. Although it's super complex to start up, right? I mean, that was 6 different steps. Rather than filling out a web form with one thing, like with one callback URL, you got to do 6 different steps in a process to get webhooks fired up. And then again, when you need to renew the verification. A few examples of folks that use this are Adobe Sign, OneDrive, Okta, and of course Smartsheet, as we've been talking about them a lot. There's other examples of folks that use these different practices that you can find also on Webhooks FYI. So now we're going to go from verifying that you have a trusted relationship at the beginning of creating the webhooks Now we want to make sure that we have a trusted relationship as we're dealing with sending the message from the provider to the consumer. So we're going to start with the most basic and then kind of escalate with each one that we're going to be doing. The first one is shared secret, which is essentially the idea that you have a shared secret. The provider, the consumer, they decide on a shared secret when they create the relationship. In our case with Twilio, Twilio actually provides that. They say, hey, by the way, if you want to use verification, then it's going to be your API auth token. Okay, but if you notice, our webhook wasn't using that. Okay, so they provide the option to either use it or not use it. But in this case, you each have a token that you agree upon and that you check. It's going to have one on one side. It's going to pass it to the listener. The listener says, yep, I verify that we have this same value or this same shared secret on either end. Super, super low complexity to set up. Although, it's also doesn't really check to see if the message integrity is intact. Also doesn't check to see if or doesn't have any confidentiality controls on the message that's being passed over. And it also requires HTTPS to pass the message on. That way you can keep the credentials that are being passed over in secret. Datadog, DocuSign, VMware are some examples of folks that use this. Progressing down our path, you can also use HMAC, or otherwise known as hash-based message authentication. It takes the same concept as shared secret, but takes it one step further. Rather than just passing the secret back and forth, they both have the same shared secret, but on the provider, it takes the shared secret and then creates a signature hash or a signature hash using the shared secret and then also the body of the message. And then passes that over. The listener says, great, let me verify that by generating its same hash and says, yeah, okay, these match. And so I'll validate this, now I'll process this webhook. So it's great because it's very low lift as far as consuming the thing. And then the auth and message integrity are super low in complexity. And then also the secret keys, the shared secret doesn't have to be passed anymore. You can actually just use the keys to pass a different, or just to pass the signature. And some caveats, there's no confidentiality controls, and there's some complexity to the signature payloads, right? So now that you're passing that over, you have to do a little bit of, you have to do the verification on your end of verifying the signature hash. You have to generate the signature hash on your end. GitHub, Shopify, Slack, Square, Twilio. So Twilio, as we were using before, they actually use this HMAC methodology. Now taking it one step further, you can do the same idea, but with asymmetric keys. So rather than having a shared secret that generates that signature hash, you have asymmetric keys so that the server or the provider, they have a private key. You as a listener, you have a public key. That way, the server doesn't have to keep handing out a shared secret. Okay, you just have a shared understanding that, all right, I'm going to use this relationship to generate a signature hash of the message body using this private key, and then using the public key on the listener end, you can verify that same hash. This is, again, it extends on HMAC, but it adds a little bit more complexity than HMAC, because you have to have the whole key relationship. And then when you start dealing with the keys, it's issuing and rewriting and rotating, renewing and rotating those keys as time goes on. So, in this situation, there's been said to have performance concerns, so you want to keep that in mind as well when you're using asymmetric keys. So if you're dealing with PayPal webhooks, in this situation, that's something that you could look into as a consumer to make sure that you could use that to secure your webhooks. Okay, now we have mutual TLS authentication. In this situation, you actually you go through an entire TLS handshake first. A TLS handshake is kind of like an asymmetric key situation, except for now, instead of having just private keys and public keys, you have a certificate that you're verifying as well that's been issued by a certificate provider that is trusted by the listener and that the server provides to the listener when the whole thing happens. So you create that whole relationship first, and then once you create that relationship, you still go through the process of creating a signature hash using the key on the one end and your message body, and the public key on the listener end and the message body, and passing the messages back and forth. In these situations, the nice thing is this also takes your messages and makes it so that those are now encrypted, so that it's the message confidentiality is actually a lot more taken care of. But then also that providers and consumers can revoke access for one another at any time. You can basically end the relationship if you feel that there's been some sort of compromise. It is highly complex. That's why we found a lot of folks don't do it, or even a lot of providers don't even provide it. But it is something that's there. And then also, again, has that complexity of the issuing, renewing, and rotating of keys. A few folks do it. DocuSign. The signature ones seem to be the folks that do it the most. So DocuSign, Adobe Sign, and then PagerDuty, interestingly enough. They do that with their webhooks for incident response. So Dataless notifications is another way to secure webhooks, more of a way of abstracting information out of the webhook notification. And in these cases, you saw in the Twilio webhooks, we had everything come across. We had their phone number, we had their text message come across, everything, all the data that happened in the notification came with the webhook. But in a dataless notification, it basically just says, hey, by the way, something changed. I'm not gonna tell you what, but it's over here. And if you wanna find out what it is, you've gotta make an additional API call back to us to find out what that is. An example of a folks that use this is Microsoft OneNote. So imagine OneNote, those documents could get pretty big. They could also have some pretty sensitive data inside. And so they basically let you know, okay, here is all the information you need to get to whatever has changed, but you need to make the API call back to us to check if this is there. There's a few things, right? So this kind of is nice in a way because it could reduce API traffic for the provider in the sense that the provider only is providing just a little bit of a webhook over to you. However, you have to make an additional call back to the server to get any change that has happened. However, I've used the Smartsheet API quite a bit, and there are some situations where you get a webhook and you say, well, I don't want to act on that. So I'm not going to act on webhooks in this particular situation. And so you aren't going to make that additional API call back. And there, Smartsheet has already figured out, sweet, we've reduced the amount of data that we have to pass, the number of API calls we have to handle. But also, they can take out sensitive, they're not running the risk of passing sensitive data, sensitive information in the webhook. You have like cells in a spreadsheet, you could have some sensitive information, or inside of a OneNote, right? You could have some sensitive information there. And so by doing it this way, you have to have your auth-bearer token to make the request back to the API to get that information as a user. So as a user, it's a little more work, right? You have to make twice as many API calls. You get the webhook that comes in, and then you have to make an API call back to the provider to get that information. So replay prevention. Replay is essentially what happens when you have a third party intercept, and then they're going to start repeatedly or repeat or replay a request that's come in. The way that folks address replay is through timestamps. So what they do is they take the timestamp that when the webhook comes through and they concatenate it to the payload. And then they sign that value, and then they send that signature and the timestamp with the webhook. It's interesting. It's one that in the research I've seen and when I was doing my reading on when you would use this and who uses this and why, it sounds like it's something that would be used in addition to one of the other methods, right? It's more of like a second level of security check. And so you're basically saying you're going to mitigate replay by associating a timestamp and making that involved, but then the listener and the provider also have to have fairly synced times and also have a mutual understanding of your time formats, your time zones and things like that. So there's some folks that do use it. Calendly, Slack, PayPal use the methodology for securing their webhooks. All right, so now that we've gone through some of those providers, and there's some other practices that are on webhooks.fyi if you want to dig into that afterwards. You can see there some more practices that you can do or look out for as a consumer, or if you're a provider, that you can implement on your webhooks. But for providers, I want to talk about a few things you can do as providers and a few things you can do as consumers. First is operate on HTTPS. It seems like that's table stakes, and folks do, because that's what most internet situations require. However, it's a good reminder. But also, notice that like we used the Twilio. So who uses webhooks today? I probably should have asked this at the beginning, okay? And then who has used Webhook Verification? Okay, wow, okay. About a third of the folks. So, okay, but the situation here is, for me, as an early webhook consumer, I didn't know that it was part of webhooks. So you want to absolutely document all the things. You want to make sure that your users know not only that you have verification, that you provide it, but also that they know how to use it. You need to show in the documentation. I'm a big fan of showing almost too much rather than too little, because you don't want to make assumptions. You know what happens when we make assumptions between ourselves, right? You don't want to do that between you and your users, because you want your users to understand how to use your webhooks, how to use your APIs as quick as possible so they can make good, secure software that's efficient and runs well. So you want to make sure that the payloads are fully documented. You want to make sure that you can demonstrate that verification and that it's obvious, not just buried down at the bottom. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, we also verify our webhook payloads. Show the whole process from end to end. Have videos, honestly, or I'm a big proponent. You want videos, you want written, you need pictures, you need to hit people everywhere where they are, depending on how they learn. So in our research, this is what we found with the providers. HMAC, far and away, the most used security method among the providers that we researched. But what's number 2? Yeah. So we have some work to do as an industry. We have as users, as listeners, we need to demand from those providers that they provide this functionality for us so that we can have secure webhooks when they come into our system. And then as users, we should probably also be looking into what is provided, right? What verification is provided by the different providers. So some things as consumers, I might have jumped to the end there a little bit. So again, using HTTPS, just keep that as standard table stakes. The thing is, when we're doing webhooks, what we should be doing is using the verification that's offered by the provider, right? We should be using the shared secret or the HMAC ways of doing things. However, most of the time, we're probably just doing this, right? We're usually just happy that we have information coming in from the other system, and we're good. But let's think about how we can make this a little bit better. So in our previous situation where we had our application, we were receiving HTTP requests freely. And so I go back here. I'm actually going to kill that. And I want to add some verification, webhook verification, to my application. I can do it in 2 ways. I'm going to show you how to do it in development environments, and then if you want to take it into production. So in a development environment, I can take this same idea where I was going to start up an ngrok session. And then I'm going to send it to that domain, but then I'm also going to add verify webhook, Twilio, and then I'm not going to make any typing mistakes in front of a bunch of people. It doesn't matter how many people you're typing in front of. It's never easy. Right. Okay, verify webhook, Twilio, and then I'm going to have verify webhook secret. As we talked about before, they do the verified, they use the shared secret, but they use HMAC to create the signature hashes of the secret and the message body. What they use, what we agreed upon with Twilio, is that they want me to pass my API auth token. I'm standing here in front of you, aren't I? I'm not showing you my auth token. So what I did do is I set it to an environment variable, which is what you should do. Never check in auth tokens or API keys into your code. I'm telling you from experience. Don't, because Git repos are forever. So, all right. So my token, here we go, Twilio token. I believe that's what I named it. Everything is good there. And now I have my application running. We can still receive text messages. If I come back here, on stage again at the end, right? Got that coming in, good. We received it. I can even come over here to my inspector. See my inspector here. Let me come up here so we can read that a little easier. On stage again at the end. But if I come over here to Postman, or if anyone else has tried to hit it, I can come back here, and we'll just make this. Do that. But if you notice down at the bottom, I got a 403 forbidden, because it didn't have that verification process. So now I can be relatively certain that the webhooks that I'm getting, the HTTP requests that are hitting my code, are actually coming in from Twilio in the way that I expected them to come. So you can have that in development, running the ngrok process here. You can also use an ngrok SDK if you want to take it into production. So I'll just show that real quick. And in this situation, I can create an ngrok session using the ngrok SDK, the JavaScript SDK. I can use the auth token that I got from my environment variable. So it's my ngrok environment variable, or my ngrok auth token, so that I can use that. I set up an HTTP endpoint. I use my same domain at hooks.ngrokpaperscissors.com. And then I have Webhook Verification for Twilio. And then I'm going to be passing the Twilio token right here. And I can have that running back here, not in caps. So now I have a tunnel passing through to my application just like I had before, and all the things are still working. Now, because it's in production, you don't see it in that inspector anymore. But I can say, this is prod. And we see right here, we have a this is prod text message coming in. I can have my bad message, but then again, I still get my 403 forbidden. So my webhook verification is still happening. All right. Okay. So as I mentioned, this is only a little bit that we have that collected on webhooks.fyi. If you'd like to see more, go to the project there. If you'd love to help contribute to it, it's a collaborative effort that we're trying to have with the community and with the industry. And so please, again, open pull requests or send out messages to me. I'm happy to handle those. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find me on one of the socials. I'm Scott McAllister. I'm a developer advocate at ngrok. And thank you all for coming to my talk. I think we have a little bit of time. Anybody have any questions?
Originally attacks, you mentioned keeping client and servers timestamps in sync. Do you really need to keep the client in sync? Don't you just need to keep track of your server's timestamps to make sure they don't regress?
You're keeping track of whether a request is out of date. So there's a certain time range that it's checking for, and so you want to make sure that it's within. You don't need to keep track of your own time because you are the client. You're just trying to keep track of the server's time. Yeah.
Based on the graph you showed of like the webhooks that are most used that you found.
That one. Oh, there we go.
That one. Is it safe to assume that like HMAC would be the easiest to implement or is the most secure? How do you interpret this data, I guess, for your own usage?
I think the way I interpret, and this is how me personally, Scott, interprets this. I look at this and I think shared secret's the easiest to, but HMAC is the easiest. You get the most bang for your buck, right? It's the most secure, easiest way to do it. And I think the fact that it's so widely used is to say that or to show that. Yeah, good point. Cool. Thank you all for coming. I have stickers on the tables, and otherwise, I would say enjoy the rest of the con, but the rest of the con is over in track 1. So thank you all, everyone online who joined.